At an upscale restaurant in Providence, a wealthy woman decided the pasta wasn't quite right. So she swept the entire plate onto the floor and demanded the waitress clean it immediately. The young server, exhausted from a double shift, knelt to pick up the mess, while other diners watched in uncomfortable silence. But what this arrogant woman didn't know was that Judge Frank Caprio, the most respected man in Rhode Island, sat 3 tables away, watching everything. And what he did next would teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Would you have stayed silent or spoken up? Comment below. The pasta hit the floor with a wet splatter, marinara sauce spreading across the polished hardwood like a crime scene. "This is unacceptable," the woman announced, her voice cutting through the quiet restaurant. "Completely unacceptable." Maria Santos, 23 years old, nursing school student, working her second double shift this week, stared at the mess. The plate had been fine, the pasta cooked perfectly, the sauce seasoned exactly to specification. But perfection didn't matter to Mrs. Victoria Ashford. "Well," Victoria snapped her fingers, "are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to clean this up?" Maria swallowed her pride and knelt, pulling cleaning supplies from her apron. Around them, other diners pretended not to notice. Some studied their menus intently, others suddenly found their phones fascinating. Only one man watched openly, an older gentleman with white hair and kind eyes, sitting alone 3 tables away. He'd ordered the same pasta Maria was now scraping off the floor. "I asked for it al dente," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you even know what that means? Or did they hire you straight off the street?" Maria's hands trembled as she wiped sauce from the baseboards. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll get you a new plate immediately." "Oh, you'll get me more than that. You'll get me a different server, someone competent." Maria looked up. "Ma'am, I didn't cook the food. I don't care about your excuses. I care about service. Clearly, that's beyond your capabilities." The manager appeared, summoned by Victoria's raised voice. Tom Morrison had run Antonio's for 15 years and knew every type of customer. He recognized Victoria immediately, old money, bored, the kind who found entertainment in making service workers miserable. "Mrs. Ashford, I sincerely apologize. Let me personally prepare your meal." "I don't want it prepared. I want it done properly. And I want this girl reassigned. She's ruined my evening." Maria stood holding a rag covered in marinara. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to cry. "Not here, not in front of this woman." "Please, Tom," Maria whispered. "Just let me finish my shift." Tom hesitated. He needed Maria. She was his best server, never late, never complained, always professional. But he also knew Victoria Ashford's type. They left 1-star reviews. They complained to the owner. They made life difficult. "Maria, why don't you take a break? I'll have Jessica cover this table." It felt like defeat. Maria nodded and headed toward the kitchen, passing the older gentleman's table on the way. He caught her eye and offered a gentle, sad smile. Inside the kitchen, Maria leaned against the wall and let out a shaky breath. This job was supposed to help her pay for nursing school. 2 more semesters and she'd have her RN license. 2 more semesters of people like Victoria Ashford treating her like she was invisible, worthless, less than human. Through the kitchen window, she watched Jessica, a new hire, barely 18, approach Victoria's table with a fresh plate of pasta. Victoria examined it like a jeweler appraising a suspicious diamond. She twirled a single forkful, brought it to her lips, tasted it. Then she smiled, not with pleasure, but with malicious satisfaction. "This is even worse than the first one," Victoria declared loudly. "Does anyone in this establishment know how to cook Italian food?" Jessica's face went pale. "Ma'am, the chef is actually from Naples." "I don't care if he's from the moon. This is garbage." Victoria picked up the plate and held it out. "Throw it away." "I'll take it back to the kitchen." "No, you'll throw it in the trash." "Right there." Victoria pointed to a nearby waste bin. "So I can watch you do it properly." The restaurant fell completely silent. Jessica looked at Tom. Tom looked at the floor. No one moved, except the older gentleman with white hair. He set down his napkin, stood slowly, and walked toward Victoria's table. Frank Caprio had eaten at Antonio's for 20 years. He'd celebrated anniversaries here, hosted retirement dinners for courthouse staff, brought his grandchildren for their first taste of real Italian food. The restaurant felt like family, and family didn't treat people the way this woman was treating Maria. He approached Victoria's table with the calm authority of a man who'd spent decades in courtrooms. His footsteps were quiet, but every person in the restaurant tracked his movement. Victoria looked up, irritation flashing across her face. "Can I help you?" "Actually," Frank said gently, "I think I might be able to help you." "Excuse me?" Frank gestured to the chair across from her. "May I?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. She was used to controlling conversations, used to people deferring to her wealth and status. This old man's politeness felt like a challenge. "I'm having a private dinner," she said coldly. "I can see that, and I couldn't help but notice you're having some difficulty with the service." Finally, someone who understands. Victoria leaned back, satisfied. "The staff here is completely incompetent. I've had to send back 2 plates already." Frank pulled out the chair and sat anyway. "Tell me, what was wrong with the pasta?" "It wasn't al dente. Too soft. Any decent Italian restaurant should know the difference." "I ordered the same dish," Frank said, his tone conversational. "Mine was perfect, cooked exactly 8 minutes, the way Antonio's has prepared it for 2 decades. Victoria's expression hardened. "Then perhaps your standards are lower than mine." "Perhaps." Frank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Or perhaps the food was fine, and you simply enjoy making people feel small." The restaurant went deathly quiet. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to stop. Victoria's face flushed red. "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" "Should I?" "I'm Victoria Ashford. My family has been in Providence for 6 generations. We donate to every major institution in this city. I could have this restaurant closed with 1 phone call." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "That's certainly impressive. Tell me, Mrs. Ashford, in those 6 generations, did anyone teach you about dignity?" "I beg your pardon?" "Dignity. The basic respect one human being owes another. Because I watched you throw food on the floor and force a young woman to clean it up. I watched you humiliate a waitress doing her best on what appears to be an exhausting shift. And I'm wondering what kind of person does that." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this, Tom! Tom!" The manager rushed over, looking terrified. "Yes, Mrs. Ashford? This man is harassing me. I want him removed immediately." Tom looked at Frank for the first time, and his face went white. "Your Honor, I didn't realize you were—" "Your Honor?" Victoria interrupted, confused. Tom stammered. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Judge Frank Caprio. I know who Frank Caprio is," Victoria snapped, though her voice had lost some of its edge. Everyone in Rhode Island knew Judge Caprio. His courtroom show had made him famous for his compassion, his wisdom, and his unwillingness to tolerate injustice. Frank stood slowly, meeting Victoria's eyes. "Then you know I don't say things I don't mean. And I mean this. The way you've treated your server tonight is disgraceful. She provided poor service. She provided perfect service. You threw food on the floor because you could, because you wanted to remind her that you have power and she doesn't, because making someone kneel and clean up your manufactured mess made you feel important." Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Frank turned to Maria, who'd emerged from the kitchen and stood watching with wide eyes. "Maria, is it?" She nodded. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, sir. I'm putting myself through nursing school." Nursing school. Frank looked back at Victoria. So, while you're throwing perfectly good food on the floor, this young woman is working double shifts to become someone who saves lives. Who do you think has more dignity in this room? Victoria's composure cracked. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in public, especially not by someone whose moral authority exceeded her wealth. Judge Caprio, I appreciate your reputation, but this is a private matter between me and this establishment. It stopped being private when you made a spectacle of humiliating another human being. Frank's voice remained calm, but steel underscored every word. Everyone in this restaurant witnessed what you did. I simply requested proper service. You threw food on the floor. Frank gestured to the stain still visible on the hardwood. Not because it was inedible, not because it was contaminated, but because you wanted to watch someone clean up your mess. That's not requesting service, that's cruelty. Other diners had stopped pretending not to watch. Phones appeared, discreetly recording. Victoria noticed and her face flushed deeper. This is absurd. I'm a valued customer. I've spent thousands of dollars at this restaurant. And that gives you the right to treat the staff like servants? They are servants. That's literally their job. Frank shook his head slowly. No, Mrs. Ashford. They're service workers. There's a difference. Servants exist to be controlled. Service workers provide a professional service with dignity. You've confused the two. Tom, the manager, stood frozen, caught between his most difficult customer and the most respected man in Providence. He'd never seen anyone stand up to Victoria Ashford like this. Frank turned to the other diners. How many of you work in service industries, restaurants, retail, healthcare? Several hands raised hesitantly. And how many of you have been treated the way Mrs. Ashford treated Maria tonight? More hands, almost every hand in the restaurant. That's what I thought. Frank looked back at Victoria. You're not unique, Mrs. Ashford. Every restaurant, every store, every hotel has someone like you. Someone who mistakes wealth for superiority. Someone who uses "the customer is always right" as permission to be cruel. Victoria grabbed her purse. I don't have to stand here and be lectured. No, you don't. But before you leave, I want you to do something. I'm not doing anything you say. Frank's expression didn't change. I want you to apologize to Maria. The restaurant held its collective breath. Victoria laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Apologize? To the help? Absolutely not. Then let me be clear about something. Frank's voice dropped, quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. I've been a judge for over 30 years. I've seen every kind of person walk through my courtroom. Rich, poor, educated, ignorant. And you want to know what I've learned? Victoria didn't answer. Character has nothing to do with bank accounts. I've seen janitors with more integrity than CEOs. I've seen waitresses with more wisdom than lawyers. And I've seen wealthy people so empty inside that they fill the void by making others feel small. How dare you psychoanalyze me? Which one are you, Mrs. Ashford? Frank continued. Are you empty? Is that why you need to humiliate a nursing student who's working 2 jobs to build a better life? Tears appeared in Maria's eyes, not from sadness anymore, but from the validation of being defended. Victoria's hands trembled. You can't speak to me this way. I just did. And unless you apologize to Maria right now, I'm going to do something else. What? You have no authority here. Frank pulled out his phone. I'm going to call my friend at the Providence Journal, and tomorrow morning everyone in this city will read about how Victoria Ashford threw food on the floor to make a waitress grovel, how she treated service workers like disposable objects, how when asked to apologize, she refused. Victoria's eyes widened. You wouldn't. Try me. The standoff lasted 10 seconds. 10 seconds of pure silence, while Victoria weighed her pride against her reputation. Finally, she turned to Maria. The words came out strangled, forced. I apologize for my behavior. Maria looked at Frank, who nodded encouragingly. She turned back to Victoria. "Apology accepted, ma'am." Frank wasn't satisfied. "Not good enough." Frank crossed his arms. "That wasn't an apology. That was you saying words to make me go away. Try again." Victoria's face contorted with rage and humiliation. "I said I'm sorry. What more do you want? I want you to mean it. I want you to look Maria in the eyes and acknowledge what you actually did wrong." "This is ridiculous, is it?" Frank's voice rose slightly. "You made this young woman kneel on the floor in front of a room full of strangers. You questioned her competence, her intelligence, her worth as a human being. And you think 5 forced words makes that okay?" The other diners watched, transfixed. This wasn't just about a bad customer anymore. It was about every time they'd been mistreated, disrespected, made to feel invisible. Victoria's composure finally shattered. "Fine. What do you want me to say?" "The truth." Frank gestured to Maria. "Tell her the truth about why you threw that food on the floor. It wasn't prepared correctly." "The truth, Mrs. Ashford." Victoria's mouth trembled. For the first time, she looked less like a bully and more like someone cornered. "I don't know what you want from me." Frank softened his voice slightly. "I want you to admit that the food was fine, that Maria did nothing wrong, that you created a problem because you could." A long silence followed. Victoria looked around the restaurant, at the diners watching her, at Tom standing helplessly nearby, at Maria with her tear-stained face and tired eyes. Something shifted. Maybe it was shame, maybe exhaustion, maybe the realization that her wealth couldn't protect her from being seen for what she'd done. "The food was fine," Victoria whispered, louder. "The food was fine," her voice cracked. "It was perfectly cooked. There was nothing wrong with it." "Then why did you throw it on the floor?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. "Because I was angry about something else, something that had nothing to do with this restaurant or this girl, and I took it out on her because I could, because she couldn't fight back." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Maria stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. "What were you angry about?" Victoria looked startled by the question. My daughter. We had a fight this morning. She said I'm impossible to please, that nothing is ever good enough for me, that I'm..." She paused, the words clearly painful. "That I'm cruel." Maria's expression softened. "So you came here and proved her right." The observation was devastating in its simplicity. Victoria's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," she said again, but this time the words carried weight. "I'm truly sorry. You didn't deserve that. No one deserves that." Frank watched the transformation carefully. This was the moment that mattered, not punishment, but genuine recognition of harm done. "Maria," Frank said gently, "the apology is yours to accept or reject." Maria studied Victoria for a long moment. She saw not a monster, but a broken woman who'd broken others to feel powerful. Maria thought about nursing school, about all the classes on compassion and healing. "I accept your apology," Maria said, "but I want you to understand something. When you go home tonight, you'll forget about this. You'll sleep in your comfortable bed and wake up in your nice house. But I'll remember kneeling on that floor for the rest of my life. I'll remember how it felt to be treated like I don't matter." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." Frank turned to Tom. "I think Mrs. Ashford should pay for her meal and leave now." Tom nodded quickly. "Of course, Your Honor." As Victoria fumbled with her wallet, Frank placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "You handled that with remarkable grace." "I just want to finish my shift," Maria said quietly. "Not yet," Frank replied. "We're not quite done here." Victoria paid her bill in silence, added a $100 tip with shaking hands, and left without another word. The restaurant remained quiet for several moments after the door closed behind her. Frank turned to the other diners. "I apologize for disrupting your evening. Please continue your meals." Conversations resumed slowly, but the atmosphere had changed. People looked at their servers differently now, made eye contact, said thank you with more meaning, left their tables cleaner. Frank gestured for Maria to sit at his table. Please, for a moment. Maria sat, exhausted and emotionally drained. Tom approached hesitantly, unsure what would happen next. Tom, Frank said, how long has Maria worked here? 3 years, Your Honor. She's one of our best. And in those 3 years, how many times has she been treated the way Mrs. Ashford treated her tonight? Tom's silence answered the question. Frank nodded. That's what I thought. He turned to Maria. You said you're in nursing school? Yes, sir. I have 2 semesters left. The restaurant helps pay tuition. And after tonight, will you keep working here? Maria hesitated. The honest answer was no. She'd already started looking for other jobs, other ways to pay for school. The tips were good, but the cost to her dignity felt too high. I don't know, she admitted. Frank pulled out his wallet and handed her a business card. My wife's sister runs the nursing program at Rhode Island Hospital. They have a scholarship fund for students who demonstrate exceptional character under difficult circumstances. I think you qualify. Maria stared at the card. Sir, I can't. You can. And you should. What happened tonight shouldn't happen to anyone. But the way you handled it, with grace, with strength, with compassion, even for someone who hurt you, that's exactly the kind of person we need in healthcare. Tears fell freely now. Maria didn't try to stop them. Tom cleared his throat. Your Honor, I should have intervened sooner. I let that woman bully my staff because I was afraid of losing business. That was wrong. Yes, it was, Frank agreed. But you can do better going forward. Protect your people. They're not disposable. They're the heart of this place. Tom nodded emphatically. From now on, anyone who treats my staff that way will be asked to leave. No exceptions. Frank stood and placed money on the table, enough to cover his meal and a generous tip. Maria, call that number tomorrow. And remember something. Dignity isn't given by others. It's something you carry inside yourself. No one can take it unless you let them. Maria stood and hugged him, an impulsive gesture that surprised them both. Thank you for seeing me. You were always visible, Frank said gently. Some people just choose not to look. As Frank left, the restaurant erupted in applause. Diners stood, clapping for Maria, for Frank, for the simple act of standing up for what was right. Maria returned to work, but the rest of her shift felt different. Customers treated her with unusual kindness, tips doubled, and when she finally clocked out at midnight, Tom handed her an envelope. Paid leave for the rest of the week, and when you come back, you're getting a raise. 3 weeks later, Maria received the scholarship, full tuition for her remaining semesters. She graduated with honors, became an RN, and eventually a nurse practitioner. She never forgot the night Judge Caprio defended her dignity. And years later, when she treated patients who society had dismissed or ignored, she remembered what it felt like to be seen. Victoria Ashford never returned to Antonio's, but 6 months later, she donated anonymously to the Nursing Scholarship Fund. Perhaps she'd learned something after all. If you witnessed someone being treated like Maria, would you speak up or stay silent? Comment below.